Right. I think the time has come. 7 o'clock. Welcome to the executive meeting, 5th of September. Thanks for coming, everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces and some not so familiar faces. It's good to see you all. Item 1, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, we've received an apology for absence from Councillor Dar.
Lovely, thank you. In terms of announcements, it's the usual. If we're speaking, obviously we're online. Please use the microphone, red button. Nothing else there, I think. So we're moving on to the minutes. Minutes from the 11th of July 2023, pages 5 to 15 on the agenda pack. Are you content for me to sign the minutes as they are, or are there any corrections or errors? Miney?
Yes, I so propose that we accept these minutes, Chair.
Thank you very much. Does anyone second? Vicky, thank you. Vicky Glover-Ward, thanks very much. So we'll vote. Everyone in favour of accepting the minutes? Thank you. Anyone against? Any? No, that's good. Thank you very much. So they're passed. Item 4, declaration of interest. Any declarations?
Thank you, Leader. I'd like to declare a non-pecuniary interest in agenda item 7, Castle Park improvements. I am a member of Bishop Stortford Town Council, and so it is a non-pecuniary interest, but I declare an interest. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. No one else? Good. Okay. Let's move on to item 5. So this is the Birchall Gardens Suburb Master Plan, which is on pages 16 to 172 of the agenda pack, and this paper is going to be presented by Councillor Vicky Glover-Ward, who's the exec for Planning and Growth.
Evening, everybody. This report seeks to gain members' agreement to adopt the Birchall Gardens Suburb Master Plan, so it becomes a material consideration for development management purposes. As members will be aware, the East Herts District Plan was adopted in 2018 and allocated a number of strategic development sites for growth. Birchall Gardens Suburb is an allocated site that represents an extension to Welwyn Garden City and straddles the boundary between Welwyn Hatfield and East Hertfordshire. Policy EWEL 1 in the adopted East Herts District Plan 2018 and Policy SP19 of the emerging Welwyn Hatfield Local Plan 2016 set out the strategy for the coordinated development of Birchall Gardens Suburb via the production of a joint master plan. The policies require a joint master plan to be prepared by East Herts District Council and Welwyn Hatfield Borough Council, working with the landowner and other key stakeholders. Normally, master planning and pre-app advice would commence prior to the submission of a planning application. However, in this case, the landowner decided to keep us on our toes, taking a slightly different approach, and submitted an outline planning application in June 2022, prior to undertaking the master planning and pre-app. As a result, East Herts District Council and WellHat decided to lead on the master planning process, and we jointly appointed Allies Morrison to devise a master plan for the Birchall Garden Suburb. A steering group was established in October 2022 and included representatives from both East Herts and WellHat. This steering group has been a sounding board for key issues, meeting on 4 occasions to debate and discuss the master plan. The details of the steering group and engagement are summarised in the report and also set out in the master plan itself. We have also engaged with local residents and councillors at 3 engagement events. The overarching objective of the master plan is to provide a long-term strategy and development framework which responds to both local and wider issues and needs. But It's not designed to be a prescriptive blueprint, as the intention is to provide a clear steer on priorities and principles for new neighbourhoods and set parameters for design proposals that can inform detailed planning applications for the site. The design approach and development objectives at Chapter 3 set out principles which combine the original Garden City principles with the TCPA's Garden Community principles to reflect the desired approach at Birchall Garden Suburb. From those principles, key themes have then been identified to underpin the master plan framework itself. The master plan builds on these key themes, and the final chapter addresses those themes section by section, which are intended to guide future detailed master planning and planning applications to ensure that the themes are maintained as proposals develop. If adopted, the master plan will be a material consideration in planning decisions relating to the site for Welwyn Hatfield Borough Council and East Herts District Council, and will be a reference for Hertfordshire County Council with regards to transport, highways and education provision. It is the view of officers that this master plan provides a strong vision supported by clear objectives and the necessary balance of detail and flexibility to guide development proposals towards achieving those objectives. Officers will continue to work with the landowners, which is Tarmac, alongside other stakeholders to ensure that the best possible design quality is achieved on this site. As such, I would recommend to you that this master plan, as detailed at the Appendix A, be agreed as a material consideration for development management purposes.
Thank you very much. You're proposing?
I am
report?
proposing.
Do we have a seconder? Okay, Tim, thank you very much. Any comments or questions, thoughts on the report? John.
I'd just like to ask a question. Given the lack of nutritious food that we see in the supermarkets these days and the high carbon footprint of any food there is in there, why are we only considering allotments and orchards for food production on this estate when it would be possible to grow sufficient food locally by people employed locally for 2,000 homes from about 20 acres of land? I would say that this lacks ambition, lacks currency. There is so much more that we can do in this front. We seem to be sleepwalking on this. And is there any link between food, between land and schools? I couldn't see any. I think I read it fairly detailed and couldn't see anything. It is tokenism. Allotments are tokenism. Orchards look nice, produce nice apples and pears. But I think we're just completely lacking ambition here. And whatever way forward it is, I would suggest that we review this and try and integrate food production into this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Vicky, do you want to comment?
I think I'm going to have to take that back and come back and talk with council officers about it before we come back on it.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to say, George? You're tempted.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think it's a good point. I think obviously our starting point with a master plan like this is the policy. So I think when we look at that, if of course we had something in the policy originally about food production, I think we'd have obviously captured it slightly different. I will say obviously it doesn't preclude the opportunities for food growth, and I think we mentioned it a couple of times. But I note that obviously what you're talking about is probably stepping up the ambitions. So I think, as I say, it doesn't stop that ambition, but perhaps it's just about scaling it up, is your point. And we've got the opportunity obviously with this site. It's not just one application. It'll be a number of applications over a number of years. So perhaps it's something we can take away to review.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, George. That's great. Okay. Any other comments, questions, thoughts from anyone? Joe? Yeah.
So the report talks about the risks of us not agreeing this this evening. And it also talks about the fact that local stakeholders have been engaged and they are supportive of this document. As we are going to potentially agree this evening. Could you just perhaps expand a bit on those risks and give us some reassurance that it does have support of the local community?
In terms of the risks, within the district plan, there is a policy on master planning that means that if you have a master plan, you can then judge the development against the master plan. So it gives you a benchmark of a load of details that are around that specific site. So the risk is that we wouldn't be able to potentially get schools, etc., in the optimum places for sustainable travel. We wouldn't be able to maybe get the local services in the place for optimal travel and use, etc., etc., etc. So it's basically, having had it looked at properly, providing something that gives an optimal design while not restricting it, because it is possible for the plans to come in and be discussed and developed along those lines. What was the second part of your question? Yeah. Okay. I may refer this to George, because you were at all three. I only attended one, so I think it would be better if George answers that, if you can.
Yes, I can certainly comment on what we've done in terms of sort of the engagement or the process. So obviously, as is the case with the majority of master plans, we set up a steering group. This is made up of a number of different members. Obviously, this one was slightly different because it involved a Welwyn Hatfield selection of officers, local people, and obviously those from East Herts as well. So we went through that process with the four meetings I think we had with the steering group. And I think one of the last things we came to actually in the last meeting was obviously you present essentially the final master plan to them. And I think those, generally they were fairly happy with the outcome. We sort of discussed with them around what they wanted to do in terms of engagement. I think what we were aware of is there was probably a bit of a time implication in terms of probably the risks that Councillor Glover was just highlighted in terms of getting the master plan in place in order to try and actually influence the decision on the current application. So we wanted to sort of discuss with the steering group what they thought was best. And I think at that point it was decided that it'd probably be best to hold a couple of engagement events. So rather than holding sort of long consultations, which we don't generally do on master plans anyway, it was around holding engagement events where people could sort of come along, talk to officers, actually understand the process, because what we also had at the same time was the plan application in. So I think there was sort of a notion that for local people, there's a couple of different layers of planning going on. And actually just being able to understand the different layers was quite useful. So we did that. The other thing actually we did, which went a bit further, was we had the draft master plan on the website as well for probably must be about 6 weeks now, with a bit of additional information as well. So hopefully we've been able to keep the local residents informed, as well as obviously that stakeholder group. I should also say, just in terms of other stakeholders as well, there was interviews held with a couple of the more key stakeholders, not just those in the steering group. So yeah, it's a fair bit of engagement there.
Thanks, George. Any other questions? Sarah.
Thanks, Ben. It's not really a question so much, but I know that obviously residents generally get very anxious when they see words like master plan and new builds and housing. And I know for our administration, we're really keen to make sure that residents do feel that they're genuinely consulted with and engaged with. And I appreciate what you're saying, George, about the sort of meetings and work that's already taken place. I was just wondering, sort of from this point forward, what we can do, I guess, as a council and as councillors to help support residents to feel that they are still very much able to genuinely have their voices heard on this piece of work.
I guess that might go a bit beyond my remit in terms of telling you guys what you can do. But I suppose it probably goes back to my initial answer, which was around the length of time that this sort of application in particular is going to likely be around, and the different rounds of application as well. I think we note within the master plan sort of design code and things like that. It's particularly with the steering group, it's never the end when master plans finish, particularly not on a site of this scale. With a couple of smaller ones, the steering group might sort of end towards the end of the master plan process, but actually there's still a role for the steering group here as the separate applications come forward. So I think we'd still expect them to engage. And I think within that, there's probably the opportunity that if it's needed, wider engagement with local, the general public as needed. I think we'd take advice from yourselves though. If there was something needed, we can obviously look to facilitate that if we need to.
But that would be engagement around the master planning. Obviously on the planning application, we've got the planning portal and residents can feed back to us via that as to whether they support, object or don't want to jump either way on that.
Thanks. Tim.
Yeah, it may not be answerable, but I wondered if you'd got an overview of how the planning application sort of stacked up against this master plan. Is it at 180 to it, or is it quite coincident with it? Are you going to have some big battles ahead in trying to realign it, or are we pushing in the same direction, do you think?
Well, there's two planning applications, because there's a planning application to LHAT and there's a planning application to us, because it is, although it's being seen as a joint site, it is two separate planning authorities. I believe that the planning application with it is in the right order, i.e. it's got all the bits. They may not be organised in exactly the way that the master plan wants them organised. But I think that the principal planning officer can probably comment a little more on the detail if he's allowed to.
I guess I'm not making the recommendation, so I can probably give away something. No, I think in terms of the application, obviously it's in at the minute. We're discussing the details. Applications of this size, there's always a fair bit of discussion to be had. In terms of how it aligns with the master plan, I mean, in terms of the policy, there was obviously an initial, I think we called it a strategic diagram. And I think although there's been a couple of variations there, probably 80% of it's fairly similar. So I think it's sort of, there's been a fairly organic sort of growth from the policy upwards. There's a couple of divergent bits, and for us, we always see it, the role of the master plan is to set a strategy or a sort of a high level framework, and ultimately if a developer comes in with a slightly different approach, it's up to them to then evidence it. Why are they still going with that? Is it still achieving, I suppose, the high level framework? So that's what we'll be judging it against. But yeah, I think at the minute there's a lot of similarities with the application, and the bigger differences are obviously within the Welwyn Hatfield part. So there's more divergence there, and happily we don't have to we're not worry about it, but it's obviously it's a question for their officers.
But obviously, if we do approve the master plan, then we can then use it as the bar from which to judge the planning application. If we don't approve it, then we can't.
Tony.
I seem to remember from when the district plan was approved by the inspector that master planning was a condition that could refuse the application on if they refused to take part in it. So that George will confirm that, I'm sure, but could you?
It's certainly a key policy in that we expect all significant applications to go through the master plan process. And although they've not necessarily chronologically, sort of submitted the application when we'd expect, they obviously have engaged with the master plan process. They've been on the stakeholder group during that. So it's, we're not suggesting that they've not gone through the master planning process. But certainly this is why we're looking to get the the master plan in place now ahead of any decision on the application.
But there is a specific bit in EWEL 1 as well as in the standard policy, which is DES 1. DES 1 is the overview for all the master planning, whereas in EWEL 1, which is specific to this site, it says that the master plan will be carried out by East Herts and Wellhat.
Tim.
And is this a no regrets decision, or is the master plan amendable as things develop as we go forward?
The master plan itself isn't amendable, but the planning application will be assessed against the master plan, and there will be normally a negotiation, a two-way discussion, because this isn't the final design, if you like. This is the master plan that has been devised. It gives the optimum layout, but then there'll be a bit of back and forth to actually inform the final design.
Okay. Any more? No, I think we're there. All right. So the recommendation for the executive tonight is to recommend to council that the Birchall Garden Suburb Master Plan for the strategic allocation known as EWEL 1, land east of Welwyn Garden City, as detailed in Appendix A, to be agreed as a material consideration for development management purposes. Can we have a show of hands for those for? Thank you very much. Anyone against? No, and abstentions? No. Thank you. That's carried. Thanks very much, George. If you want to, if you want to go, or stay if you want to stay on, feel free. You may have a better evening. Thanks very much. Right, item 6. So we're moving on to item 6 on the agenda, which is fit and proper persons determination policy for mobile home sites, which is on pages 173 to 196 of the agenda pack. And this is going to be presented by Councillor Sarah Hopewell, Executive Member for Wellbeing.
Thanks, Ben. So the fit and proper persons determination policy represents a change of legislation. So there wasn't this requirements up until this was introduced, and it applies to mobile home sites, so residential sites, which I believe there's 10 in East Herts. And it basically requires that there's a suitable, it's operated by somebody who has passed the suitable fit and proper persons check. And the rationale behind the regulations being introduced was to protect tenants of the mobile home sites from, well, a wide range of things really, but illegal behaviours, including things like harassment and financial exploitation. So the legislation itself was originally brought in 2020, but due to the pressures of COVID, and then the post-COVID sort of recovery time, it's being brought to us to consider this evening. The recommendation is that we agree the policy. To do so is keeping in line with the legislation. Not to do so, there's I've got to say as well, there was a consultation about it. There wasn't any feedback from the consultation, but people were made aware of it, so there was no feedback, so no negative comments or concerns were raised at that point. So those affected are fully aware of it. So yeah, the recommendation is to approve the policy.
And are you proposing the policy?
Yes.
Thank you. Anyone prepared to second? Thanks, Vicky. Any discussion, any comments, questions, thoughts from anyone? Tony? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Having two of these sites within my ward, and both of them have been very, very difficult sites. I want to know a bit more about the strength of this system, because both of these sites, to say the least, have been difficult. And I think you know all about it, Paul, don't you? If you could give me some assurance that it's got some teeth to it, otherwise it sounds to me a bit pointless.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the legislation's backed up by our enforcement policy, so that, you know, we need to take a balanced view on it, and it's got to be proportionate. But anyone that fails the test basically can't run that site, so they would have to get someone else in. We'd keep going through that process. If they keep nominating people to be a manager, they keep failing, it would go on. It can be for us as the council working with them to nominate an individual to run that site, but that has to be in agreement with them. And hopefully, yeah, if it was with us, we would obviously know how to find someone suitable. But yeah, I don't see why it wouldn't be enforceable. I think it's a good bit of legislation that's there. There are, as Councillor Hopewell said, that it is for residential sites rather than holiday sites. It is for it's not for single family sites, so there may be in that 10 there may be 1 or 2 we find are out of the scheme, but yeah, it's I think it's certainly enforceable.
Okay. Any other questions? No, I've got a kind of mechanistic question, I suppose. It seems rather minor, but do the fees, so there are 10 sites and obviously the fee level is stated here. Does it cover the cost of running the process, so to speak? Do we know?
Yeah, I'll just comment on that. Yeah, the fees have been set on a cost recovery basis. And we have used the council's fees and charges strategy, which obliges us to do that. And we've also, I hope you note that in the recommendations, we make it clear that that would then be subject to an annual uplift in line with that fees and charges policy.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much. Question? Yes.
Sort of a two-parter. We've got sort of 10 sites. Presumably those sites will have to apply for this now. Do we have an idea of, are they all expecting to pass fairly easily, or are we expecting, you know, a chunk of work to come here? And the second question, if I may, is my understanding this is kind of national legislation, and a lot of this policy is going to be common with what other councils are doing. Can you comment to the extent that this is, you know, cut and paste from what's been done elsewhere, where there's differences that are specific to East Herts? If you could just comment on that, please.
So we developed this in consultation with other local authorities. We jointly appointed a solicitor to kind of rally the views together because of, as you say, COVID and part of our recovery. I would say that there will be local differences due to the way that enforcement is done in different in different local authorities, and that's common throughout. But in principle, the legislation itself sets out what that person must pass. So those core bits will be the same throughout. In terms of the pass rate, if you like, I think it's hard to comment on that without going through the process. The way the legislation for mobile home sites is managed or is applied, people will get their planning permission, they will then apply for a site license, and then that site license lasts in perpetuity or for as long as the planning permission. So for some of these sites, we haven't been going there for a few years or so. So we don't know how they are. What I would say is we do not have regular complaints about any of our sites from any of the tenants, any of the residents, sorry. So I would, my gut feeling is that this shouldn't be a problem, but time will tell.
If I may just perhaps add to that to provide what I hope will be some further assurance. Councillor Hopewell has mentioned this is relatively new legislation, and as with any legislation over time, and it's as it is national legislation, sometimes things are challenged, and through case law, further kind of guidance and best practice emerges. What I would add to that, to provide some assurance of the robustness of what is in front of members, is that the concept of a fit and proper person is not uncommon in some of our regulatory and licensing activity. And I would reference our taxi policies, drivers and operators, where this approach has been in place for some years. And we have used that, and indeed we have been tested through appeals and such like, to strengthen the requirements. And there are some parts that Paul Thomas Jones has worked closely with his colleague for licensing, Oliver Rawlins, on picking up the best practice from that policy as well. And there are some clauses in this that we have learned through that experience, so that we feel it is a robust policy that you have in front of you.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. That was very helpful.
Any other questions, thoughts? No. Comments? Okay. Should we take this to the vote? So there are 5 recommendations for this item. They're on page 173 and 174 of the agenda pack. I won't read them out. A to E. Can we have a show of hands in favour, please? Thank you very much. Anyone against? No. Anyone abstaining? No, that's passed. Thank you very much. Right, coming to the item number 7. Right, Castle Park Improvement Project, match funding contribution via optioned sale of final community centre, which is on pages 197 to 206 of the agenda pack. And this is being presented by Councillor Carl Britton, Executive Member for Financial Sustainability.
Thank you, Ben. This report concludes the council approved process designed to fund a previous overspend in Castle Park lottery project by selling 3 community centres to Bishop Stortford Town Council. The centres have been a draw on council maintenance budgets and managed on behalf by the town council for some years. The initial plan was to use capital receipts only from the sale of the first centre. Further financial pressures, however, experienced during the project have presented a need to use capital receipts from the sale of the last centre. The Town Council had urged Council to use these funds from the outset, agreeing to match each contribution from their own capital reserves. It has been crucial throughout this process, however, for Council to consider wider issues faced from similar pressures relating to other major capital projects. Essentially what we're doing here is we're looking to sell the final community centre, which will then enable the funding of the Castle Park to be completed. So yeah, I'd like to propose this.
Thank you very much. Anyone second? Thanks, Chris. Any comments, questions on this paper? Okay. I think we'll. Oh, sorry, there's a question.
Sorry,
No.
it's just double checking really. I mean, obviously, you know, this is the third and last one, and the other 2 already took place. Have there been any concerns arising from the first 2 sales? Any changes that or negative impacts or none that you're aware of?
I'm not aware of any. Would you got any, Helen? No.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question about the National Lottery Heritage Fund grant. That was £600,000, wasn't it? And I think that was extended. Do we know how long it's been extended for? Is that due to run out, or have we got enough time?
I believe at the moment it's due to run out at the end of this year and in December, but I think informal discussions have taken place and that will extend it for a further 6 months. So
And that's sort of long enough to do the work that.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Question, Vicky.
I noticed that some of your cost overruns were due to finding archaeological remains. Is there a risk with any of the further work that you might dig up more skeletons?
I'm told that there aren't any risks, but I presume that work has already been done that might have uncovered those.
Yes, so they have done some excavation work, and they weren't actually expecting to find any more skeletons that close to the surface. But they actually were only just below the surface of the ground, so they have done scans, etc. Not expecting to find any more.
Fingers crossed, yeah. Great, okay, no more questions. Should we, I think we'll move to the vote. There are, what are there? 3 recommendations, A to C, which are on pages 109 or page 198 of the agenda pack. Can we have a show of hands in support, indicating in favour of this paper, please? Thank you very much. Anyone against? Any abstentions? No, thank you very much. That's passed. Right, last item of the evening, item 9, urgent business. Are there any urgent? No, no items of urgent business. That's good news. So I think I can declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for staying on.